Today, I'm going to talk about something that I am describing in my next book. It is this idea of a linear journey of becoming. It is this idea of this progression that's going to move us from the safe harbor of comfort and familiarity that we find ourselves anchored to, through a ravine of fear, into a world of learning that ultimately affords us growth. So we're going to start with this idea of your safe harbor or your comfort zone. So as we jump into the conversation today, I want to start with agreeing up front, if you will indulge me, that growth is a requirement to being fulfilled. As in, I do not believe that you can be fulfilled if you are not growing. And I will also posit that I believe that each of us, every single one of you that is listening, is either growing or dying, right? You cannot be in the middle. You are either growing or dying. And that if you want to be fulfilled, you have to be growing, because you cannot be fulfilled in a dying state. All right, stay with me for a second. But in order to grow, it is something that exclusively comes at the expense of comfort, right? Comfort is a casualty of growth. Comfort is a casualty of growth, which is a long way of saying that if you want to feel something deeper, if you are here today wondering, how might I feel more fulfilled? Well, then you're going to have to start by challenging your relationship with comfort. Right? Like I said, the decision to leave your safe harbor for a lighthouse that might sit on the opposite shore, it is something that in many ways is linear. It requires that you move through these distinct environments in sequential order. I'm going to hold up a piece of paper. I don't know if you can see this forwards or backwards, so I printed it both ways. There is a lighthouse, and under the lighthouse, it says the word safe harbor. But I'm going to describe this progression of going through your safe harbor, through a pool of fear, into a sea of learning to ultimately reach an ocean of growth. Okay? It is a linear thing, and the broader framework of this entire conversation is built with this eye to this reality that we have to think about our relationship to each of these things if we're going to effectively navigate from safe harbor to growth. Right? Why do so many of us find ourselves living with things we are familiar with? Why is comfort so attractive? Right? That's a place we have to start. Clinging to comfort is a byproduct, I will argue, of fear. Fear of the unknown, a disbelief that we might have in our ability to acquire new skills, the way that we've framed the risks associated with failure, the illusion that we may hold to us having some kind of control, the way that we think playing it safe will likely have certain things turn out. But as you've already heard from so many Growth Day teachers, there are dangers in comfort. Right? There are trade-offs that come in choosing to stay inside of the suffering that you may already know and be familiar with. And so often we choose, and I'm one of these people, I chose to stay in suffering that I knew because it was more predictable than the fear of having to try and do something new. But now that I'm doing something new, even though it's scary, I can tell you there is riches in having pushed myself into that fear. I love John Maxwell. I don't know if you guys know John Maxwell, but he said the distance between where you stand now and where you want to be is measured by the changes that you're willing to make in your life. Okay? The distance between where you are and where you want to be is measured by the changes that you're willing to make. Change comes at the expense of comfort, right? And so more than anything, as we have this conversation today, my hope in any of this is to equip you with the courage to make change, to challenge these relationships so that you might become open to the possibility of the good that can come, the growth that can come in redefining some of those relationships. I want you to connect to the courage and confidence that already lives inside of you to take one step and then another away from this place that you've known for all the opportunity to unleash the purpose and meaning that you deserve in this life. All right. One of the reasons I will argue also that we tend to cling to comfort and the relationship is so crazy, it's because of something of a belief that we have that the things that have existed or that currently exist will exist in perpetuity. Right? I think that's one of the biggest dangers of the safe harbor, right? Thinking that the things that we've come to know can be counted on. The pieces of identity or status, security, familiarity, more that live inside of like employment status or a relationship or a certain state of health you might be in or a state of life that you're experiencing that are all there, right? They're all there until what? Until a pandemic comes along, until downsizing happens, until you get a phone call from a doctor with a diagnosis, until divorce, until kids head off to college and it changes who you are to them and who you are on this planet, right? So it might sound a little bit scary, but we end up actually being in much better shape to meet the challenges of the future if we give up the illusion that the harbor is safe in and of itself in the first place, right? Like part of what I hope that you leave the conversation with is just a touch more courage, a touch more resolve to consider the call that exists beyond your safe harbor. Even though heeding that call will often come at the expense of comfort, even though it requires you to reframe this relationship that you have with the familiar, you will inevitably have to burn the altar of what you know for the invitation of something new. And yep, that can be scary. But in this debate over taking the chances required to unlock the fulfillment that you desire, as you weigh these pros and cons of staying where you are because you believe that you know what this version of your life holds, what it unfolds, that control is an illusion. I am speaking from personal experience. This control does not really exist. Did anyone experience 2020 with me? This control did not really exist, right? So like believing that you know how this life unfolds is actually taking a passive posture in reaction. You are choosing to react to the way that life comes at you instead of a proactive approach to engineering the kind of life that you'd hope for in fulfillment. Right? So the closest thing that we can actually get to in being in control is when we end up being the person who's moving forward to actively create our destiny rather than waiting for it to be handed to us, right? Manufacturing our next moves instead of having to react to a move that is made to us. It is not a question of whether a move will be made to you or not. You are not going to win the no moves coming your way lottery. It don't exist. So you get to choose. Do you want to actively take a posture of engineering an outcome that you'd hope for or react to one that you don't expect or want? I'm excited to be here today. I want to talk, like everyone this month is going to, about your health and wellness routine. But I think we got to start at a place that is maybe the most important. And that is, we're going to have conversations about building routines or thinking about health as it works best for you, right? As it works best for you. I think it's super important for all of us and every single class that you end up stepping into this month to appreciate that the journey that you're going to take for your health, all the routines that you might develop, they are wholly and totally unique to you. I have myself made mistakes in trying to lean into and take someone else's routine or listen to someone else's advice and apply it in my life, only to find that their routine, their plan, their diet, their mindset, their work on their health was appropriate for them, but not for me. And so sometimes when we start talking about health or have a conversation about wellness, there's this hope that there's a silver bullet, that there's this single thing that you're just going to be able to do. It's going to immediately jump you into how you'd hope to feel. And the reality, it's just not quick work. Transformation, building habits, having a routine that works for you or accommodates your lifestyle doesn't happen in a short window of time. It certainly hasn't for me. It's taken me years to morph and adjust my life, my body, my mind over time, and it's going to be the same for you. And I think it's important to just kind of set that frame up front so that you don't get too hard on yourself, so that you give yourself the kind of grace that you're going to need when you start trying some new things to tailor your health needs, your wellness journey to the things that you need. I have, in the last decade of my life, been what the medical community would define as obese, right? This tall frame, I'm 6'4", I've held 40 more pounds than I carry today. I carried it for years and years in a way that compromised my energy, affected my sex life, affected my confidence, compromised my mindset, made my blood pressure higher, and so many more things. And I'm 46 years old now. But when I was 30, 15 years ago, entering my 30s, I was not this lean, mean fight machine that you see in front of you today. I was the opposite. I had the hubris of a kid who never ever contemplated the implication of not tending to my health and wellness. I thought I'd live forever. I didn't give that much a thought of how foods affected my body. I didn't see the benefits necessarily of moving it every single day or drinking enough water. I certainly leaned on too many coping mechanisms, drinking too much alcohol, doing things like eating my feelings in a way that was inconsistent with who I'd hoped to be. And now I want to shake that kid by the lapels, right? Every day when I wake up, I want to try and see how I can make up for that lost time. Yeah, what could I have done with that metabolism of a 30-year-old? What could I have done with these years that I didn't apply some of the discipline that I apply now? But what's interesting is I've also come to appreciate that bemoaning why I hadn't started earlier, having guilt or shame for wasting time or not focusing on the things that I'm focused on now, doesn't serve me at all, right? There's something in the same way that we approach mindset, in the same way we approach almost everything you're going to talk about with all of our teachers, not just this month, but every month, around programming, around limiting beliefs, that in some way inform how we've approached health and wellness historically. In a simple example, I've talked about how I've become a runner. I'm 46, I run a ton. Running has become this beautiful combination of church and therapy, but I only started running 10 years ago. Didn't run a single mile outdoors until I was 36. And in part, it was because I believed a story that was told to me, God bless it, by my mother, who was concerned about how tall people's hips, back, knees were affected by running. And I took her truth and I accepted it as my own without testing the hypothesis of what was possible inside of my own health. And then one day I ran and I didn't have the things that she was afraid of. And I became a runner for challenging this story that was handed to me as love that was truly a reflection more of her fear. And as I unpacked that limiting belief, my mom is neither tall, she's not a runner, so she didn't actually have credibility on this component of my personal health journey. And so making that limiting belief for me untrue was something that unlocked an outlet for me that's become this amazing source of strength. And I don't know what your storytellers have told you in how you've approached health over the years, but one of the things that you'll inevitably have to do in this, your personal health journey, is understand why you haven't given as much weight to your mental health as you do physical, not as much time to understanding your emotions and your emotional health journey as you might your relational health. Because there's something in storytelling that's kept you from indulging in and making equally important each of the big 5 components of health, your emotional, mental, relational, spiritual, and physical components of health, right? When I think about the idea of holistic health, the way I want to try and explain it to you is just like the idea of a wheel, the idea of a stool, right? If you think about those 5 components of health and are only really leaning into and catering to 3 of the 5, that bike don't ride. That stool don't support your weight. You have to find a way to consider the equal distribution of your attention and your intention so that you can create a holistic plan that actually serves you and the person you hope to become, the way you'd hope to feel about yourself when you're by yourself, okay? So as we jump in here, I'm going to ask you to, on your piece of paper, write down a little bit of homework. Okay. In the work, I want you to be vulnerable, be honest. I want you to answer this question. How do you feel about yourself when you're by yourself as you think about your health and wellness journey? Right? When I've confronted these things that I don't like, where I've been honest about where I have room to grow, that's how I've developed my habits. That's how I've created my morning routine. In part, my hope is that if you can connect to that question, we're going to go into this full month of teachers that are likely to bring up things that for some of us is going to be just a little bit hard. It may even be somewhat triggering. Some of you are maybe more evolved in your health journey. Maybe there'll be nothing triggering. This is just going to be fantastic, celebrating good times. Come on. But there could be, for some of you, a stigma around mental health. There may be challenges for some of you in confronting some of the emotions that you feel that are connected to some of the experiences of your past. There may be some of you that don't like the way that body image or weight creates something of a trigger for you. Okay. If you can first start with understanding where those triggers exist, that's the first step. But I also, since this is the first of the conversations for an entire month on health and wellness, I want to start by honoring the fact that you are freaking here. You are here. You are here, and your decision to be here is already putting you on the path to developing something around health and wellness that is going to get you a step closer to whole. You're here, and in being here, it also starts with acknowledging that as much as you do want to identify where you have room to grow, that you are on day one, as you start the rest of the life's journey that sits in front of you, already good and worthy and enough as you are. Because if you start in a place of deficit, if you start in a place of shame, if you start in a place of inadequacy or scarcity, you will not be able to stick to anything that we talk about in this course or any of the courses for the rest of the month. You have to start by believing that you are amazing and awesome and glorious as you are, but also that you're allowed to want to start pulling on these threads to understand where you can take a step forward in your health journey in a way that shame is not invited. It doesn't serve us. It doesn't serve you. It's not going to be an important part of how you actually make the progress that you want going forward. You have to choose, like I said up front, to develop something that is uniquely, specifically catered to you, which means that comparison does not have a part of this story. You're on your own journey. It's a journey that starts by honoring that you are amazing and here and willing to take a step forward. The topic of confidence. It is a good one for all of us because confidence is a required ingredient for everything that we are hoping for in the pursuit of the life we're trying to create inside of this year or any year. And also change challenges confidence. It's going to come with these questions of what might happen in these new unknowns. It's going to trigger our anxiety, our worry of what if, our worry of how long. It requires better question asking around what can happen, right? What kind of preparation is required to be ready, fortifying our confidence with the kind of planning that will have us preempt the thing that might get in our way long before it does. So I want to try and walk you through a little framework around what might happen, what can happen, and what will happen. I want you to take the time and write a letter to your fear. What are the things that you fear in this journey of growth that you've chosen? What are you worried about in relationship, in finance, around your health? What are the things that are triggered insecurity-wise, imposter syndrome, whatever it might be? I made a list of my fears, and then I asked these two questions. Which of these fears are actually real? And which of these fears can a plan be created for to address the warranted fear? The interesting thing in going line by line through my 46 things is that many of the things I thought were, of course, yes, totally ridiculous. 80% of them gone. But the other 20%, they were warranted fears, right? Those fears were real. And I believe that the role that those fears were playing was a prompt to ask questions on how I could best prepare to do it scared, but ready. The ability to formulate the kind of habits and routines, the circle of support, the resources I'd need to ready myself to, yes, confront my fear. The fear was not going to go away, but to do it in a way that changed completely the way I felt courageous and up to the challenge. Let's dive into what might happen. Epictetus said, man is not worried about real problems so much as by his imagined anxieties about the real problem, right? It's an idea that was reinforced by Seneca. We suffer more from imagination than reality. I want you to grab a blank piece of paper. I want you to draw 3 circles on the blank piece of paper. This represents the things that we worry about, the things that can happen, and the things that do. I have filled it out for you so that you can fill it out yourself. The whole pie is the way that our brain processes every single thing that could possibly happen on this journey of becoming. The smaller circle is the list of things that actually can happen, because our mind is so crazy, it will have us worrying about things that could never happen. But that smallest dot, those are the things that actually do happen. And when you can see it against the backdrop of how much we afford, the weight of worrying about everything with how much actually happens, it just affords you a confidence to dismiss a little bit of the rhetoric that voice in your head is trying to sell you about why you should be worried in the first place. Now, that in and of itself, that's not going to make your anxiety go away like magic. There is a next step. And I don't know what role anxiety plays for you, but I will tell you, for me, anxiety is providing me information. It's intel, right? It's a trail of breadcrumbs in my life to a place where I do not yet have clarity, where I don't yet have a solidified plan. And in the ambiguity that exists in not yet having a plan, I am afforded an opportunity, because of the message relayed by anxiety, to dive into and consider how I might become just a little bit more prepared for this piece in my life. It has fundamentally changed the way I think about anxiety. Thank you, anxiety. I hate that I've become grateful for you, anxiety, but in fact, when it presents itself, it's just trying to help me create clarity in a part of my life where there is ambiguity. All right, I want you to take a new piece of paper. I want you to write down, like I have written down here, what might happen and what can happen. The homework for you is to take the letter that you've written to your fear. And on the left side, right, what might happen, write any of the things that might happen and put them on that left-hand side of the page. On the right-hand side, the things that can happen, write those down and put them on the right-hand side of the page. Once you have every fear that you attribute to what might happen, I want you to ask yourself the same question that I did. Is this fear real? Is it actually something that can happen? Is it actually something that is highly likely to happen? And if the answer is no, can you have a conversation with that fear and release it? Can you connect to confidence in a way that might allow you to cross it off the list? If you need to, could you write that fear on a piece of paper, crumple it up in a ball, and symbolically, as you let it go into a trash can, release it from the weight that you would have to carry in keeping it a part of you in the journey from where you are to where we're going, right? The next step, right, for any of the fears that still exist after you've tried to release the ones that are not real, is how do you take the limiting belief that you currently have about your ability to handle this fear, this thing that might happen, and turn your limiting belief into an empowering belief around why you are completely qualified to handle it. So I'll give you an example from my list. On my what might happen list, I couldn't let go of my anxiety around, what if I put myself out there and fail? right? I'd had a very successful job inside the Walt Disney Company for 17 years, the last 7, where I'm the president of distribution, surrounded by the greatest intellectual property, the best teams. I was always an accomplice to success, not solely responsible for it. In the work that I did in the Hollis Company, working with my partner and wife, Rachel, building something that was built around, again, great intellectual property, it was not all on me. And here I am leaving a harbor that was previously safe for a harbor where I know I will grow, and it all falls on me. What if I put myself out there and I fail? So I ran through an exercise that I call positive, negative, reframed, okay? When you take the things that might happen and you're able to create 3 columns of the positive outcomes, the negative outcomes, and the reframed outcomes of what might happen if these things were to pass, then you get a chance to actually see all the scenarios that could unfold, right? For me, I might be seen as underqualified to do this work. I might embarrass myself publicly. I might be triggered to reach for negative coping mechanisms when I feel badly about it, right? Those were my limiting beliefs. And in establishing those limiting beliefs up front, as I went through the positive, negative, and reframed outcomes, I made a list of every single thing that could happen if I put myself out there and failed, right? All the good things that could happen, hey, I'd learn. All the negative things that would happen, I might be embarrassed. And anytime I wrote something that was negative, I was then challenging myself to ask, but is there good that could come from this negative scenario that I'm believing in? Is there a way for me to see that negative as happening for me instead of to me? And once I went through the positive, negative, and reframed outcomes, I was able to go back to my limiting beliefs. And I was able to challenge each of them in a way that made them empowering, in a way that fortified me with the confidence to believe that I am perfectly qualified. And so my limiting beliefs became, I'm already qualified to do this work because of the experiences that I've had and the willingness to be vulnerable and share this journey with others. I changed it to, the only way that I'll acquire skills necessary for the audacity of my life is if I can envision the embracing of failure as the vehicle that's going to help me grow. I reminded myself that I've already made it through 100% of my failures. And I've done so in a way that has every single time left me stronger, having learned more and growing because of them. Okay, so that's the work for you. I want you to take your fears, create this exhaustive list of every single thing that can happen, positive, negative, and then reframe anything that's negative. And do some work on the limiting beliefs that you have going into the exercise and how, knowing now that you can turn any of the negative scenarios into something positive, that it might afford you this permission to have an empowering belief on why you are perfectly qualified for this life you are hoping to live. We're going to talk about values, establishing a foundation for what you stand for. Right? Identifying the non-negotiables in your life, they frame who you are. They frame how you hope to feel the day, experience your week, how you hope to show up in the world. But if you don't know what you stand for, if you don't know what your values are, you'll have no hope in actually focusing in on or creating discipline around the life that you hope to build, to enjoy. When I'm doing coaching, I did this last time. I'm gonna do this probably every time. For some reason, I tend to turn to sailing as a storytelling device. I'm not a sailor, I'll be honest, but there is something about this idea of leaving a safe harbor from which we often find ourselves tethered to for the life of personal freedom, for the fully exploited potential that might exist beyond the jetty. The attempt, as I say, to honor the intention of a creator who very deliberately puts specific skills, gifts inside of your being. All of those things happen when you push into choppy water. So when I was thinking about how do I talk about values, I was actually drawn to a story I'd heard about something called ship killers. Let me explain. Ancient seafarers, when they were plotting their courses, originally it was by stars. I'm sure that they used some kind of geometry, maybe even depended on Dwayne Johnson from Moana. I'm not sure, but they often were looking at some North Star that kept them moving in the right direction. that regardless of the conditions of the sea, they knew to value so that they could make it on their journey. And as time progressed, maps end up coming in. And so now instead of stars, they're looking at paper, and on the maps, there were particular things to take note of that were called ship killers. Rocks, islets, breakers, reefs, wrecks, obstructions, spoil areas, right? I said I'm not a sailor, so I had to actually look up what a couple of those things are. I didn't know what an islet was. I don't know what a spoil area is. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is, if you're going to head out to sea, damaging your hull or bending your propeller or anything that might keep you as the floating boat from floating, that might make it run aground or stop floating, that's not ideal. That's not a value, right? The value that any skipper has is to keep this vessel sailing, to do it in waters that allow it to traverse the sea safely and in as uninterrupted a way as possible as they make their way toward their destination, that North Star. And so the interesting thing for me about values is that core values are obviously things that help you clearly identify what you stand for in a way that designs guardrails around what you do, right? Follow that star. And maybe more importantly, what you don't do, right? Don't sink that boat. So the ways that you navigate and progress through the journey of whatever ends up sitting ahead for you is balanced in some ways around what you do consistently, discipline and focus, and making sure you're avoiding what you don't do so that you don't run aground. For me, I've got 6 core values. I'm not sure that there's a right number of core values, but I'm going to ask you as a part of homework to make sure that you can name the things that you personally value in your life. My values: centeredness, right? The idea that I am working to live, I'm not living to work. Advocacy, right? Showing up as an ally to anyone who may be marginalized or may not benefit from the privilege that I do. Growth, that I'm striving every day to be better than I was yesterday. Optimism, choosing positivity, hope in what's to come, the good that can exist even inside of hard times. Service, just wanting to put on the cap of servant leader in any and every aspect of life. And responsibility, the idea that I want to try and act with integrity. And those things for me are the North Star. Those are the things I hope to live into every single day. These are the things that I've signaled to anyone in my life that would be classified as an accountability partner, BRENDON among them, to be on the lookout for if I start veering off course, right? If I know that my work starts to compromise my ability to show up as a dad, or negativity in hard times starts to paint a pessimistic vision of my future, then I'm compromising my ability to reach my goals. I'm doing something that comes at the expense of my value, and I might, because of that disconnect, undermine how I actualize my actual calling, right? So I know why I'm on this planet, right? I'm on this planet to change it, to have impact on it. Right? The purpose of my creation is a reflection of the values that I hold. And I will argue they need to be a reflection of the values that you hold. And so I want to keep my family a priority, advocate for others, chase growth, see the good, serve well, and do it in a way that creates consistency between my ambition and my everyday actions. And if I drift away from my core values, right, I run into a ship killer. I slow at best or sink at worst my pursuit of becoming who I'd hoped to be. So for you, homework starts with a question. And it's a very simple one. What do you stand for? What do you stand for? Unless you know what you stand for, unless you know your core values, you don't have a sense, you don't have a handle on what it is that you're going to need to do. So you have to set that North Star. Right? Create the guardrails that reinforce what you do and what you don't do. Be clear about who and how you'd hope to show up as every single day. And then you give yourself the chance to actually be that person. Answer this question. What do you stand for? Create a list of your core values. What attributes would you need to have present every single day in your life, all the time, to have anyone who's witness to you living your life know without a doubt what it is that you stand for? right? Knowing what you stand for is going to be a big part of how we help cast the vision for where you're going, where you're going to focus your energy and how you'll deploy your discipline to actually get there.
This can be your day for personal growth. This can be that day you committed to and you remember, you go, that was the day I got myself a community. I got better coaches. I committed to making my life the absolute best that I could. This is that day. Make today your growth day. Click the button on this page and sign up right now.